Welcome. Come, sit with me a while. Tonight I want to share a story from the Gospels, the wedding at Cana, where water became wine. You know the story, perhaps. But tonight, I want to imagine it differently, through the eyes of someone who might have been there. Someone the scriptures don't name, but who would have seen everything unfold. This is a meditation, an imagining of what such a person might have witnessed, might have felt, might have carried with them for the rest of their life. So let me tell you his story. The steward hired to manage the feast, a man whose entire identity rested on his ability to judge wine, to control the flow of a celebration, to make a wedding run flawlessly. A man whose expertise was about to encounter something beyond expertise. I held the cup to my nose, swirled it slightly, let the vapors rise. Adequate. That was the word that came to me. The wine was adequate. A local vintage, probably 2 seasons old, a bit thin in the middle notes, but acceptable for a family of modest means. I had tasted better. I had certainly tasted worse. For what they were paying me, this would do. The courtyard was filling now, guests arriving in clusters, voices rising with the kind of particular excitement that comes with weddings. I moved between the tables, watching the servants position the lamps, checking that the bread was fresh, that the platters of lamb were arranged to catch the eye. 20 years I had been doing this work. 20 years of managing feasts, of judging wine, of knowing exactly when to bring out the next course, when to signal the musicians, when to let the celebration build, and when to let it rest. People hired me because I knew these things, because I could take their meager resources and make them feel abundant, because I had a reputation. The bride and groom took their places under the canopy. She was lovely in the lamplight, nervous, her hands folded in her lap. He sat beside her with the stiff pride of a young man trying to look older than his years. I had seen 100 couples like them. The trick was to make this night feel singular, feel special, even when you were working with thin wine and borrowed dishes. That was my skill. That was what they paid me for. The servants began to pour. I watched the flow, the pace of it. Too fast, and you run out early. Too slow, and people notice the scarcity. There was a rhythm to it, an art, and I had trained these girls myself over the past 2 days. They moved between the tables with the cups, filling and refilling, and I tracked it all in my head. How much was in the storage jars? How many guests? How long until the celebration would naturally wind down? The numbers felt tight, but manageable. I had managed tighter. Old Ezra struck up his lyre, and the music lifted into something bright and expectant. People began to eat, to drink, to talk in that particular way that happens when strangers become companions through shared celebration. I stood at the edge of the courtyard, half in shadow, watching the servants, watching the wine levels, watching the faces of the guests to gauge if anyone was dissatisfied. This was my domain, my responsibility. If something went wrong, my name would be attached to the failure. One of the girls, Rachel, caught my eye from across the courtyard. She was young, easily flustered, and the look on her face made my chest tighten. I moved toward her, keeping my expression neutral, my movements unhurried. Never let the guests see concern. "The wine," she whispered when I reached her. "Show me." She led me to the storage area where the large vessels stood. I looked inside each one. My throat went dry. We had perhaps an hour left, perhaps less if people kept drinking at this pace. The evening was young. The dancing hadn't even begun, and we were running out. I felt the familiar clench in my stomach, the cold wash of reputation about to be damaged. 20 years, and I had never run out. Never. I prided myself on that, on knowing exactly how much to provide, on stretching resources without anyone noticing the stretch. But this, did someone miscalculate? Rachel's voice was small. I wanted to blame her, wanted to blame the family for being too poor to provide enough, wanted to blame anyone but myself. But I had approved the amount. I had said it would be sufficient. My expertise had said yes, this will work. And now my expertise was about to be proven wrong in front of a courtyard full of people. Keep serving, I said, but slow down. Tell the others. Slower pours, smaller portions. She nodded and hurried away. I stood there breathing through my nose, thinking. There was no market at this hour, no way to send for more. Water it down? No, impossible. Anyone with half a pallet would taste the difference, and then we would be shamed twice over, for running out and for trying to hide it. My hands were shaking slightly. I pressed them against the cool stone of the nearest jar and tried to think. A woman approached. I had noticed her earlier. She had come with a group from Nazareth, sitting at one of the far tables. Older, with kind eyes, and the sort of presence that made you stand a bit straighter. She spoke to Rachel and the other servants, her voice low, but carrying authority. I caught fragments. Whatever he tells you, do it. I turned to see who she was indicating. A young man, carpenter's hands, perhaps 30. He had been sitting quietly at the meal, and there was something about him, something that made the space around him feel different, charged somehow, or perhaps just quiet in a way that stood out against the noise of celebration. He stood and walked toward the 6 stone water jars that lined the courtyard wall. Large vessels, ceremonial, used for washing. They were mostly empty now, the water used up as guests had arrived and purified their hands. He looked at them for a long moment, then spoke to the servants. Fill them with water. I stepped closer, not understanding. We didn't need water. We needed wine. What was this man doing? But the woman, his mother, I learned later, stood watching with a calmness that suggested she knew something I didn't. And the servants, uncertain but obedient, began to haul water from the well. It was hard work. I watched them pour bucket after bucket, filling each massive jar to the brim. The water caught the lamplight as it splashed and settled. Just water. Clear and ordinary and useless for what we needed. My mind was still racing through impossible solutions, still calculating the shame that was coming, still trying to find a way to salvage this feast and my reputation with it. When the jars were full, the young man said simply, "Now draw some out and bring it to me." Rachel dipped her ladle into the nearest jar. Her hand trembled. She poured the liquid into a cup, and even from where I stood, I could see her face change. See confusion flash across it, then something like fear. She carried the cup toward me with careful steps, as if she were bearing something that might spill or break or vanish if she moved too quickly. She held it out. I took it, frowning. The liquid inside was dark, red, not water. I lifted it to my nose. The aroma hit me first. My throat tightened. It couldn't be. I had spent 20 years training my palate, learning to discern region and vintage, to identify the subtle notes that marked quality. I knew wine the way a shepherd knows his flock, the way a mother knows her child's cry. I knew wine, and what rose from this cup was beyond anything I knew. I tasted it. The world went still. Rich, deep, layered. The fruit was there, yes, but underneath it something else, something I had no words for. It moved across my tongue like music, like sunlight, like the first rain after drought. Not thin, not adequate, not acceptable for a family of modest means. This was the wine you served to kings. This was the wine you laid down for years and brought out only for the most important occasions. This was the wine that made you close your eyes and forget to breathe. I stood there, the cup in my hand, my mind trying to catch up with my senses. Where had this come from? The family couldn't afford wine like this. No one could hide wine like this. You didn't just produce wine like this. It took years, decades, the right soil, the right sun, the right crushing, the right aging. You couldn't just. My hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. I looked at Rachel, at the stone jars, at the young man standing quietly to the side, his expression unreadable, at his mother, who showed no surprise at all. The servants were staring at me, waiting. The celebration continued around us, music and laughter, and the warm press of people enjoying a wedding feast. They didn't know that something had just happened, that made no sense, that violated everything I knew about wine and its making. I walked toward the bridegroom. My legs felt unsteady. He looked up as I approached, still young, still trying to project confidence, still unaware that his wedding had just been saved from disaster by something I could not explain. I needed to say something, needed to acknowledge this wine, this impossible wine. The words came out almost without thought. Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now. He blinked at me, confused. Clearly, he had no idea what I was talking about. Clearly, he thought the wine I held was the same wine we had been serving all along, just held back for some reason. He glanced at his bride, at his parents, trying to understand my comment. But I wasn't really talking to him. I was trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to fit this into some framework I understood. You always served the good wine first. Always. It was the rule. It was practical. People could appreciate quality at the beginning when their palates were fresh. Later, when they had drunk enough to be merry, you could serve lesser wine, and no one minded. That was how it worked. That was the order of things. Every steward knew this. Every host knew this. But this wine had come last. And it wasn't just good. It was better. Better than anything we had served. Better than anything I had tasted in years. It reversed everything. Made nonsense of the rules I had built my career on. The bridegroom stammered something. A thank you. A confused acknowledgement. People near enough to hear my comment nodded and smiled, thinking this was some clever strategy, some generous gesture. They reached for more wine, pleased, satisfied. The servants poured from the stone jars, cup after cup, and the wine flowed like it would never end. I stood there, holding that first cup, unable to drink more, unable to set it down. My mind could not reconcile what had happened. The feast went on. The dancing began. The bride and groom were blessed and sent off with joy and well wishes. Guests praised the wine, praised the hospitality, went home satisfied. And I moved through my duties in a kind of daze, managing the flow, directing the servants, doing all the things I had done 100 times before. But everything felt different now. Off balance, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted slightly and I was still finding my footing. Later, when the courtyard was emptying, when the lamps burned low, and the musicians had packed their instruments, I returned to the stone jars. They were still there against the wall, ordinary and worn, nearly empty now after serving so many. I ran my hand along the rim of the nearest one. Water had been in these jars. I had seen it poured, and wine had come out. I did not know the young man's name, did not know where he had come from, or how he had done what he did. His mother had asked him to help, and he had helped. And then he had slipped away into the night without waiting for thanks or recognition. As if turning water into wine was simply what one did when asked. As if the impossible was, for him, ordinary. The stars were bright above the courtyard, the night air cool against my face. I still held the cup in my hands, the dregs of that impossible wine dark at the bottom. Tomorrow, I would go back to judging vintages. But I would carry this knowledge with me, that once something had happened that exceeded everything I knew, that the best had come last, not through planning or strategy or expertise, but through a quiet word spoken beside stone jars filled with water. I did not understand it, could not explain it, could not fit it into the framework of knowledge I had built my life upon. But I had tasted it, and I would never taste wine the same way again.